the RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast, sponsored by Bank of Ireland.
Hello and welcome along to the RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast. Quarter-final time in France, Ireland against New Zealand this Saturday night in Paris. Can Ireland finally get over the line in the quarter-final hurdles at the 8th attempt, or will New Zealand gain revenge for the Test series last summer? To discuss it all, Bernard Jackman is with us as usual on our Thursday pod. Birch, looking forward to this one.
Yeah, look at mixed emotions all week. One, confident, nervous, not sure, but look at we're getting closer now, so we'll know on Saturday night who the best team is.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll go back and forth on those emotions over the next half an hour, 40 minutes as well. Also with us this week, delighted to welcome on former All Black and Auckland Blues hooker, and now Sky New Zealand analyst and from the RTÉ Rugby pod, James Parsons. James, welcome. It's the second time in a row these sides have met in the quarters, but this one certainly feels like it's got a different edge to 4 years ago.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting, to be honest. It's a rare occasion for the ABs to sort of be underdogs, and when they have been underdogs, they don't have a great track record, but nothing to lose, I feel, for us. Backs against the wall. It's probably an easier spot than Ireland in terms of that expectation and pressure. Like, there's a huge expectation pretty much from a lot of people in New Zealand that they'll win this and they'll win the whole thing.
Yeah, that's a nice kind of starting point to jump off on then, because as you said, New Zealand being slight underdogs for this one is a strange occurrence, and I kind of was curious to see what the feeling is in New Zealand in general around this, because in Ireland I think it's similar enough to the way myself and Bernard have been speaking in these opening couple of minutes, where we're kind of acknowledging the fact that Ireland technically are favourites, but it's not quite sitting right with all of us that we are favourites for a game like this, and you're kind of going back and forth on your emotions over it all week. What's the feeling down in New Zealand? Is there confidence that the All Blacks will or can go on and win?
I think there's obviously a lot of nerves, to be honest, but there's a lot of interest in the World Cup, and I mean that's one positive, is rugby's getting a lot of eyes because of that uncertainty of result. I think as fans, you always like going to a game and having that uncertainty, but it's probably 50-50 that probably people publicly don't give us a chance, but then there's 50 that sort of probably sort of the history and what the jersey means, and I suppose what this side's shown when they've been under immense pressure. Yes, they've had ups and downs, but when they've been under immense pressure, they've delivered.
Birch, I think part of the uncertainty this week is that we're probably just not entirely sure where New Zealand are at, where obviously they had the disappointing defeats to South Africa and then maybe a less disappointing one to France, but obviously it was a tough one to start the tournament, and they've had 3 big wins since, but you're taking the standard of the opposition into account, and just because of it's far tougher to get a read on where they are, for example, compared to getting a read on where Ireland are, where they've slowly built up to quality opposition, and there's no real secrets to Ireland at the moment, whereas we're just kind of wondering what kind of New Zealand are going to be there on Saturday. It could be any kind of an extreme.
Yeah, and that's so rare in World Cups, because New Zealand are normally very strong 2 years, 2 years leading into it. But obviously, this has been a bit of a chaotic prep for them, and that always hasn't led to success in World Cups. Obviously, there's been some high-profile blow-ups, but you kind of know what team you're going to get. And also, obviously, post-France, they have obviously been really impressive. But New Zealand have always had the ability to put away those minnows with probably an easier fashion than say someone like Ireland or Scotland, etc. So I think this is going to be a real test. I think we're better off with the fixtures we've had. Obviously, that big South Africa game week off Scotland, so we kind of have exposed little areas of a game that we need to improve on. And New Zealand are going to hope that doesn't get exposed on Saturday. But there's still massive respect. Like, you look at the quality of players in this New Zealand 23, and it would put the fear of God into you. And then the coaching staff, Foster's obviously vastly experienced. Joe Schmidt's in there, etc., and some incredible experience in the playing ranks. That have been there, done that, and those players know how to get that big performance out. So if New Zealand bring their best performance, well, maybe that's going to be too much for us. There's so many unknowns.
James, on that, on the layout of the fixtures New Zealand have had, is there any part of you that wonders, are they a little bit undercooked with the games they've had in the last few weeks, or are you still confident, just based on, I suppose, the muscle memory of the team, that they'll be able to get themselves right up to the right pitch this weekend?
I think what it's done, the positive out of sort of rotating, is people have had to perform to get selected for this game. So the competition in squads and the way they're sort of prepping during the week sets them up for their success. But, I sort of said on my podcast, I really like the way Ireland did it. Personally, like just running the big guns against the minnows and just building those combinations. The only risk you have when you do that is an injury. So if you do some damage to some key players, then you're chucking players in that haven't had as many minutes. So I think South Africa and New Zealand, I got sent this thing today that they're in terms of the squad, they're in the lower minutes for pretty much per player. But again, that can go either way as well. You can be underdone in the big moments. So look, I've confidence that they know who their main 23 is, and I have confidence they would have put, I suppose, a lot of hours in during the week, but not necessarily always in those games, which I don't think is a bad thing, because we've all played the game, and when you dominate sides that much, you probably get a little bit more out of training, that sort of last training before those big games, in terms of those physical collisions. So I'm sure they've done the work there.
Interesting as well, Birch, on the teams and the injury loads and stuff like that. Ireland naming their team a day earlier than usual, just with the layout of not having to travel on Thursday and the players having their day off then. But the bits that stand out, obviously, Mac Hansen is past fit and starts on the right wing. Jimmy O'Brien is on the bench. James Ryan misses out with that wrist injury. Ian Henderson continues to start in the second row. Don't think there was much of a surprise that Henderson was retained, but Ryan obviously misses out in a place on the bench, and it's Joe McCarthy who gets the nod as the second row replacement ahead of Ryan Baird. On Mac Hansen, how confident are you that by 8 p.m. Irish time, 9 p.m. local time in France on Saturday night, that Mac Hansen will be starting on the wing?
Look, there's obviously that doubt there. I mean, for a winger to do his calf, and then play 7 days later, is always unlikely or looks unlikely or a bit of a risk. But to be fair to Farrell, he's never really played silly buggers with team selection. Other coaches in our sport, James, in our main sport in Ireland, hurling and Gaelic, the teams that are announced are often a long way from the team that actually runs out. But in rugby with Farrell, he's generally picked a team that's showed up, and I think you'll all be watching that warm up on Saturday night, checking out Mac Hansen. But I also think if it is a doubt and he pulls out, it's probably good for Jimmy O'Brien to have, just come in under the radar. And obviously he came in last minute against South Africa in November, did really well, and he's built up a lot of experience with Leinster. But it would be a blow for us to lose Mac Hansen. James Ryan is obviously a key man for our front five, but Henderson, is a probably more specialised liner caller, and also had a big performance last weekend against Scotland. So it's to be in this stage of the season, having played as many of our frontline players as we've had, we're actually in an okay position injury wise. It certainly won't be like against Argentina and France or in Wales where we were decimated and went out limply in a quarter final. This is as strong as we could probably hope for, and against a very strong New Zealand side.
Yeah, New Zealand not naming their squad until a lot later today, so I probably won't go too much into that. By the time some people listen to this, the team will be out. But James, on the Irish selection, when you look at Hansen being cleared to play, James Ryan missing out, what are the main thoughts you had when you saw that match day 23?
Yeah, I mean, consistency of selection. I'm a big believer, and if you get your weeks right and you get your team, you get those sort of combinations together. That's how you get those consistent performances. And that's what we've seen from Ireland for 12 months. This going into the 18th test, potentially winning in a row at a big tournament. They haven't skipped a beat, this group. So, I mean, look, we have so much admiration for Johnny Sexton over here. Like, we wax lyrically about his ability of the impact he has on the game and the impact he has on the players around him and just what he demands. I can only imagine he demands a hell of a lot more during the week, but he's like a real orchestrator. And his sort of combination with Jamison Gibson Park with that forward pack it's pretty to watch. They are the form team, and my mum. Actually, I'm quarter Irish. My mum's half Irish, and I have to convince her sometimes that to remind herself she lives in New Zealand, she needs to support the All Blacks because she's jumping on the island train at the moment.
Whereabouts in Ireland is she from? Do you know?
I don't know, mate. She was born here in New Zealand, but my granddad, who I never met, came from over there. So
very good. So, but worst case scenario, you'll have someone to cheer in the semi-finals next week. Yeah?
Oh, mate, I'll be hurting. That's exciting though. Like, it is as tough as it is. Like, I think it's really good for the game. Like, that uncertainty result, get people back engaged. It's exciting times for rugby, I believe.
Yeah.
James, sorry, I'd love to ask James a question around what you think about the All Blacks mindset. So I remember I spent some time with Wayne Smith a few years ago, and he spoke about the All Blacks. One of the big things is they have this, hunter mentality rather than hunted. And obviously at the moment, going into the matches underdogs, and everyone talking up Ireland, effectively Ireland are being hunted here by the All Blacks. And do you think that will actually suit the All Blacks? Are they better out in front? And then just an interesting quote during the week I read from one of the press conferences: if you're held down by the waves of the past, you won't be able to do anything. And you would think that was an Irish player talking around our failure in previous World Cup quarterfinals, but it was actually Aaron Smith basically being asked about the All Blacks form. And I think obviously you've got two teams who are maybe Ireland obviously on form, but there's obviously that baggage of, at the end of the day, if we go out to New Zealand, we've finished in the same point that we've finished in every other World Cup pretty much. And then the All Blacks, can they get over that fact that they lost two tests to Ireland and New Zealand, they lost Argentina and New Zealand, obviously France at home in the opening game, the first All Black team to lose a group game. I just fascinated what do you think the mindset would be like in this All Black squad? And obviously the last thing is obviously Foster leaving. Is that something the previous All Black teams I've watched and admired kind of had that consistency of coach as well? But obviously it's going to be a big change now after this World Cup.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Like, I think if you knowing the players that are in there, and knowing their history, not only international rugby but Super Rugby, when the pressure comes on, it's almost like they step up. If you look at Ellis Park last year, I think that was a really good example, because it really hurt after that home series loss, but that immense pressure on Fozzie, and the lads standing up in that moment shows that I suppose when they have that sort of connection and that buy-in, they have the ability to beat anyone on their day. But the big thing for them will be controlling the emotion. I think, I've actually liked what's come out of the camp. They're really focused on themselves and not too focused on Ireland. They can only control what they can control. And then it's controlling that emotion, because you want that fire upstairs, absolutely. Fire in the belly, but you want to be cool upstairs. Because we know penalties will be dangerous against Ireland. They showed it when they were down here. Their mindset was to go to the corner and suck the tank dry. And that paid dividends in the last 20 minutes. And I suppose if you look at this World Cup, the All Blacks have conceded most of their points in the last quarter. So conserving that energy will be massive, but also conserving that emotional energy before the game, that they're not flat. So I definitely think they can do it. We know they've got the performance in them, and they've got the chip on their shoulder. And I've said to a few people this week, I've got a number of Irish mates as well that just are loving this and getting into me. But I think it's a dangerous place to, write them off. I just think there's more in this test match, and it'll come down to those sort of that last 20. And I think the bench will play a massive role, especially around those indiscretions. That'll be a big part of deciding this test match.
Yeah, the motivation side is the really interesting part as well, because I think both sides have an enormous amount. Like, we're talking about New Zealand losing a very, very rare test series last summer, but on the flip side, Ireland also have the motivation, not just of their quarterfinal hoodoo and losing to New Zealand 4 years ago and losing in such a brutal way as well. It was such a hammering. But Birch, the other massive one that I think it's probably kind of gone under the radar a little bit because we're probably all afraid to kind of mention it. But we're into the territory now where every time Johnny Sexton steps on the pitch, it could be for the last time, not just in Test rugby, but in rugby in general. And that has to be an enormous motivating factor for the rest of the squad.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I think if you saw the reaction the players gave to Peter O'Mahony for his 100 cap, and they did it for Conor Murray back in South Africa, did it for Earlsey against England. So there's obviously a huge respect for what those legends of Irish rugby have done, and the squad always seem to get up to the pitch emotionally when they need to mark that. Obviously, this is a quarterfinal in its own right, and the rewards are clear. I mean, look, the reality is both sets of players are 3 weeks away from changing their lives. You know, particularly for Ireland because we've never been there before, but for Ireland to win a World Cup, it will effectively change those players and coaches' lives forever. You know, I'm lucky enough to do some stuff with some of the England team who won the 2003 World Cup, and they would tell you that, you know, their lives changed on that day in Australia when Johnny Wilkinson kicked the drop goal, and that's how close they are to it. You know what I mean? Like, there's kids playing rugby, dreaming about winning the World Cups. Well, these lads, Johnny Sexton, at 38 years of age, he's 3 weeks away from potentially doing that. And I think that Farrell will lean on that this week. Farrell's been very good at building the mindset, getting teams emotionally ready. We did it against South Africa, and that was obviously number one in the world against the world champions, and laying down a marker. Scotland was a different thing, and we blew them away. But I think Sexton deserves an absolute performance from all the team because of what he's done for them when they've had their big days as well. You know, he's carried his team through, I would say, so many games in his career, and yeah, it'll be a sad day when he eventually hangs up. But hopefully, it's not Saturday night.
I reckon that might be like quite a key deciding factor. Like, there is a lot of emotion in this test match for both sides, like you've just mentioned for Ireland, but, you know, obviously losing down here at home and you know, sort of wanting to get one back. I reckon the key would be for both sides is probably downplaying it during the week, because you know what it's like when you're playing. Like, you don't need, you know, that's there, and if you play on it, you can probably hype it up too much, and then you'll see a card or something early in the game which will just blow everything out of the water. So I reckon the side that controls their mindset around there and keeping calm and just engaged in the process of it, which is extremely hard. But the one thing the All Blacks have experience of by a truckload is finals footy, and how to prepare and how best to get a result. Because don't forget, when it was 2015 and 2011, the expectation was all on New Zealand. You know, so Ireland are in that position, but they've never been there. So it's for them, it's really controlling that and just knowing they've just got to keep doing what they're doing, which I'm sure they do. But for the All Blacks, it's like, man, we've been there. We know how to do it. And this is the blueprint. And those senior boys will step up this week to probably take the emotion out of it, I'd say.
And Bert, that muscle memory of knowing how to do it in finals footy, as James says, like, that's such an important thing.
Yeah, but in fairness to Farrell, he's tried to replicate that without it being a World Cup, if you get me. So that was part of the thought process around that tour to New Zealand with five games in 3 weeks. Obviously, they lost the first test, managing to, then it was knockout footy, really. You know, he talked about that. He talked about, and actually the South Africa game, the Ireland-Scotland game, they talked about it being a knockout game, a last 16 game, to try and get into that mindset of, you know, we're good in cup final situations. The England game in the end of Six Nations, it's not a World Cup, but it was effectively for a Grand Slam, and you know, they built it up to be that. So what they're very good at, James, with Farrell and the coaches, is they start to build emotion up early in the week and make sure that they feel they're ready, and then they ease off a little bit. You know, so it's not the morning of the match, you know, a big pump up. It's get the emotional layer right early in the week, and then just kind of let it seep in, so they're ready. And they've done a very good job. And obviously, you know, I think testament to that is going on 17 match winning streak. Is there's been times when they've had to spike the emotion for France at home and South Africa at home in November, etc. But they've managed to be able to perform. And as you know, and that's why I think there's certainly fear for me when I look at an All Blacks team, because there's probably 7 or 8 players in that All Blacks team who have gone to the well at many times over their career and have been able to find that extra 5 or 10%, in an All Black jersey or in a Crusaders jersey or in another franchise jersey. So both teams have that in their locker, and it's a case of who gets it right, you know. And like the fascinating thing for me is, and so I did something with Johnny Sexton and Gary Ringrose last year, and they both, and they genuinely believe this, they both believe that in a clash between New Zealand, Ireland, South Africa, Ireland, South Africa, New Zealand, and France, there's a gap between those top 4 teams that effectively it may come down to a bounce of a ball on the day. And I think that's, I find it hard to understand that mindset, because, you know, they prepare for 4 years, and they talk about a process, look after the process, the outcome, and the outcome will look after itself. But they also admit that effectively, when you've got teams of that quality and are that evenly matched, both teams can bring their A game, and effectively a little bit of luck can decide it. So you're saying, oh, look, I could win a World Cup because I prepped for 4 years, but also I could win a World Cup or lose a World Cup because of a bounce of a ball. You know, it's tough. It must be tough to have to go out there on Saturday night knowing that sometimes circumstances outside your control could decide it.
I think that's, again, that's the mental play. Yeah. You know, like the person that makes a mistake or has that error, you can't compound that error with 2 or 3 more penalties, because then you're just piggybacking or knock on or whatever. The team that can make errors but, you know, sort of absorb the pressure, you know, is critical. And I suppose if you do look at Ireland, like their accuracy, both sides of the ball, is immaculate. Like, so for us, the All Blacks, we've got to show them something they haven't seen. You know, especially early in the game, you've got to put that pressure on the breakdown. I reckon that they take their time to obviously set Jamo up for those kicks. You know, Jamo was 11 carries, 8 kicks against Scotland, whereas Sexton was 5 carries, 2 kicks. It's like, we've got to not allow them to kick on their terms or play on their terms. You've got to sort of shock them. And then you can, like Smithy was always big on this, is you show them one picture early, then you can show another picture. And it gets them thinking, and it just gives them that moment of hesitation that maybe Sexton has to carry. Or maybe he throws that pass, it gets intercepted. Or maybe you hit that ruck off the kickoff and the ball bobbles out and Jamison can't kick, you know, like from a stable base. All those little fights that, you know, it may only work once. But if you just keep going, you keep going, that may be the one play. And that's that relentless mindset that, you know, the All Blacks will have to bring for 80 minutes. Like, you cannot switch off against the side. Like, if you look at Scotland, you know, they tackled it 93%, but they were all passive. You're just not stopping that. And that's why Jamo ran for 11 times, because people are standing and watching what's going on out here. He's too good for that. So you need to be able to hit Jamo. Like, if he has a run, he's got to go to deck and he's got to remain there. The same with Sexton. If he has a run, you've got to, you know, early on, make them get out of their rhythm, because at the moment they're making rugby look easy. Like, they're just like, it's a great way to watch footy. And then their desperation on D. You know, like, if you look at the two teams, statistically, the big difference is when Ireland make a line break, 62% of the time they score. Whereas we've made a lot more line breaks, but we only score 48% of the time. We're not going to get that many opportunities. So that accuracy of making those line breaks count is huge. And then, you know, obviously with Ireland's, you know, sort of pressure around their defence and their willingness to go to the well, as you say, like on the line, and how they held South Africa out, like they've got their mojo going. So the All Blacks need to knock that mojo a little to make them hesitant, I think.
It's interesting what James says there, Birch, about the tackle success that Scotland had, where they were up well above 90%, but they obviously weren't making the tackles count, so to speak. And it's similar to what we kind of talk about with Gary Ringrose, where you look at his stats at the end of a game and you might see 3 or 4 missed tackles in there, and I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 tackles made, and it doesn't look good necessarily. But then you look back at the footage and you see that on plenty of the tackles that he's technically missing, he's kind of just funneling a player back into a really, really dangerous zone where a turnover might occur or where someone else is going to make a dangerous tackle. And is it, for New Zealand, is it about trying to get Ireland into those situations where they're they're not necessarily just soaking up the pressure, but they're taking a little bit of a risk in defence to try force an error.
Yeah, I think that's been the most noticeable thing about Ireland's defensive progress or transition under Simon Easterby. We've gone from being quite a passive team who made a lot of tackles, but very few impact tackles, very few forced turnovers. And now you're seeing much more freedom, and not as obviously evident as South Africa with Faf de Klerk obviously being a shooter, but Ringrose certainly has a license to make reads, and I don't think they get stressed about those missed tackles because obviously it forces errors or sends people into down dark alleys. And yeah, against the All Blacks, like, we're going to have to defend for our lives, and thankfully our defense against Scotland was excellent, but that's not really a litmus test of what you're going to face. I mean, All Black attack is far more fluid, and even the Springbok game, you know, we defended well against the Springboks. Huge effort and honesty and good detail, but again, the Boks aren't the best attacking team in the world. If the All Blacks bring their best attacking game, that is the only time I think you can judge your defense and say, yeah, we have a world-class defense. I think the All Blacks attack is actually better than the French attack. Over the course of 80 minutes, the French obviously have
in what way is it like better? Would you?
Well,
say?
I would say their attention to detail on their first phase strikes is better. So over the course of the last 4 games, they've identified very quickly and early before the game areas are going to attack and have put together, you know, the strike plays to hurt the opposition. Started back in the French game from the first line out play. And it's continued all the way through, and that was something that Joe Schmidt was very good at with Ireland. So, you know, we haven't been exposed off first phase strikes yet, but you can be sure that Joe Schmidt will have seen something that they'll go after, and if they can get, you know, a line break early off set piece, well then, you know, and get a score, well then they're into it. So, and then I think their phase attack, I mean, you know, everyone talks about Ireland's skill set across the board, but effectively that was driven by what New Zealand have done for 10 years, where their forwards were had a higher passing percentage than any other forward pack in World Rugby, and you know, they still have elements of that. It's not as, that's part of the reason why maybe the results aren't as good as their general attack has dropped a little bit. But when you look at the team they can put out and the quality that's in it, I think this will be our biggest test overall for in terms of our defensive capacity.
It doesn't really matter though how good your attack is if you don't win that breakdown.
Yeah.
You know, like, that's the only thing that stuffs attack is someone slowing your ball. And obviously Ireland in the World Cup are number one at breakdown turnovers and just being disruptors. So I think you're right, especially early in the game. Like, I don't even think we need to throw passes out the back or tips or anything. You just got to go direct. Like, get Shannon Frizzell and, you know, Brodie Retallick, Scott Barrett just charging. And trying to, you know, actually meet the contest early. We saw we executed it so well at Mount Smart Stadium against South Africa earlier in this year. And if we can bring that sort of intensity in and around our collision areas, yeah, our attack is, you know, it's lethal. But they need time and space, like anyone. You can't do much without time and space. Doesn't matter how good you are on a rugby field.
And breakdown, I mean, it was a major factor in the test series last summer as well. Even just thinking back to right off the top of my head, I remember Tyg Byrne in the final 10 minutes of that, it was either of the second or third test, making 3 turnovers inside his own 22 when the game was 9-10 points of a swing there. And do New Zealand have the ability to deal with Ireland on the ground like that? Like, have they improved as a forward pack over the last 12 months since Jason Ryan came in?
Oh, yeah, they've definitely improved. I mean, you just look at their set beats, you know, their maul D, their breakdown for the most part. But this will be the big test. I mean, that breakdown work will be big test. Having Shannon there is huge. We know what Adi can bring. You know, I know you guys have been a bit harsh on our skipper, but man, that guy cleans more rucks than most. And the boys love him. So, and we know what Brodie's done. You don't become World Player of the Year in the second row if you don't know how to do the business up front and then the Flash Harry stuff. So there's the pack there. It's just, as I say, for some reason, you know, there's little dips along the way, but when the pressure comes on, they do seem to deliver. But I do think it's important to not, like, have that clarity of, right, once the ball goes to that middle forward, he's ducking his head. and we're going to have 6 legs or at least 4 legs against 2, and have Irish players landing on their back and we're on top. The worst thing that could be do is send one up there, isolate them, and they go back and they land on their back. That's only going to generate belief in the Irish team. So that first 10 minutes is it's going to be brutal. It's going to be great to watch, not so good for the bodies out there, but it'll be, I think, a sign of what the test will be.
Yeah, just on that, Jay. I don't know who's been slagging off Sam Cane, but
I was just about to ask you about that actually, Birch.
No. I don't. I think it's madness. I think he's well respected in Ireland, particularly amongst anyone who's played against them. So if someone is having a pop off him, I think that's uncalled for. I know there's a bit of back chat between Peter Manny and him last year, but that's heat of the moment.
That's
stuff.
good.
I mean, that's heat of the moment stuff.
No.
Genuinely, I think that back row you just mentioned. I think Frizzell obviously missed that French game. I think he adds a lot. I think Brody is starting to find his form a little bit. Just little glimpses of that meanness, that edge, and that's what I'm saying. I think some of those players may have dipped a little bit over the last 2 years, but it's like us, like our Centurions, the Conor Murrays, the Peter Mannies, the Johnny Sextons. They find their form again when it really matters. And I think this is going to be a phenomenal test match. And I was lucky enough to be there for France, New Zealand, and when that haka was happening, and just the stadium, just you could feel there was going to be a good game. And obviously France managed to turn it on in the last 30 and win the game. But I think there's more on the line now. It was always clear New Zealand or France were going to qualify anyway, regardless who won that. Whereas this is knockout rugby, and it's going to be special.
I've been planning to ask you a handful of times, James, so far, but we keep going down these little tangents. But
sorry, I always go down rabbit holes, bro. Sorry, mate.
It's a good sign. Joe Schmidt, obviously, is there's a massive Joe Schmidt narrative running it the whole way through this game, and I am kind of conscious anytime in Ireland when we see a lovely New Zealand try or a brilliant strike play that instantly we're going, oh yeah, that's Joe Schmidt's work right there, all the good stuff. What has the general perception been of what Joe Schmidt has brought to New Zealand in New Zealand?
I suppose I know a lot more about what his impact at the Blues was, the Super Rugby side. He helped out there as sort of like a resource coach and around that skills area. And it seems like he may have, sort of taken that aspect to the All Blacks. And the big thing he focused on was breakdown. The work he's put in and around that breakdown work and how critical it is to do the flash tries is probably, from hearing the lads, especially the Blues guys, it was a lot of hard work, a lot of body on body. He's obviously pretty ruthless in his application, but I'm a firm believer if you don't do it during the week, you're not going to be able to do it on the weekend. So I kind of like that, and it made that was the year the Blues made it all the way to final, just fell one short, but it was a big difference for the Blues and getting that speed of ball for guys like Bodie and that to have that time and space. But also, as I was saying before, disrupt it. It's that disruption, that ruthlessness to try and get the ball to bobble for Jamo so he can't have that clean base.
Birch, do you see every now and again, are you seeing little elements of the All Blacks play and thinking, okay, there's Joe's fingerprints all over that? Yeah,
for sure. And even going back to that first test, and just they varied it up. They went to that third forward across 2 and hurt Ireland there. And Ireland actually stole that and just kept it in their locker and tried it against South Africa. So the All Blacks have always been have traditionally been at the forefront of innovation and probably forging the way the game has been played and coached. And that's probably the question that's been asked now is, has there been too much sharing from the All Blacks, and have they lost that edge? It's very difficult in the world at the moment with so many players and coaches moving from Northern Hemisphere to Southern Hemisphere, and to basically keep that IP to themselves. But I don't think it's a case of bringing anything new on Saturday. It's literally just doing the basics incredibly well. If you think back to that France-New Zealand game, it was New Zealand's scrum in the first half, gave away 3 penalties, 9 points for Ramos. And that, and because France were struggling a little bit. So, is that better now? Obviously, there's a bit of question mark around some of the props, injuries, etc. Line out, Ireland's line was good against Scotland, but over the last couple of months, it's hasn't been top level. And then I totally agree with James. The breakdown is massive. The breakdown has always been the heartbeat of New Zealand rugby. Quick ball, cleaning out bodies, taking people off their feet. Ireland have spent a huge amount of time on that. Our breakdown is very good, but I mean, whoever wins that battle and whoever gets on the right side of Wayne Barnes as well, it will win the game.
How do you see, like, if you're trying to get a read on Wayne Barnes for what he's going to want at the breakdown this weekend? Are there any telltale signs from games down the years of what he seems to allow, or what he seems to be a little bit more harsh or lenient on, Birch?
Yeah, I think I've been surprised by the reaction to some of the Irish rugby public about Wayne Barnes getting the game. I actually think Wayne Barnes is a very good referee.
I think it's because he referees Ireland and Irish teams so much. You're bound to find a couple of bad defeats in there.
Oh, totally. But I actually look back at the stats, and it's been pretty. It's been very much in favour of Ireland. And I don't think that he's decided any of those games. To be honest, I think he's a really good referee. He's very experienced, which is going to be key because this is going to be so intense. I mean, the atmosphere is going to be electric. There's a lot of pressure on referees, pressure on them to make decisions quickly, which is making it harder. And I think we need his experience. And he's a good communicator as well, and he knows both teams very well. So no, I was delighted when I saw Wayne Barnes. And regardless of whether we win or lose, I won't be saying afterwards it was Wayne Barnes' fault, or credit to him. I think this game will be won by the players.
And just to go alongside that then, James, as well as break down and be able to handle or figure out what Wayne Barnes is doing, keeping 15 players on the pitch. We saw how important it was in the test series last summer. We've been speaking about it so much, about how excellent Ireland's disciplinary record has been. 3 yellow cards in the space of 2 and a bit years. You can't really overstate it. Keeping 15 players on the pitch is quite important, and it was something New Zealand struggled with 12 months ago. They've improved since then, obviously, but this weekend wouldn't be the right time to let that start slipping.
The emotion is the key bit there, I believe. Like, it'll be like a head that you don't see in a breakdown. If you just go aimlessly in with a shoulder, the emotion in that first collision, making sure that body height's low, you can still absolutely chop people in half if you get yourself low enough. So I think for both sides, you'd hate to see it decided by something like that. But I agree with you with Wayne Barnes. Like, the one thing I admire about him, whenever I've watched him, if he makes a call in the first minute, he'll do it in the 80th. And there's a lot of refs that don't do that. And it used to irritate me. It's like, man, if it's good enough then, it has to be good enough now. I think it's good. Like, man of his experience, it is going to be a doozy. It'll be, how many seats is it at that place?
80,000.
Up around 80,000, yeah.
80,000. So there'll be 79,000 Irish and 1,000 Kiwis. And they'll be singing that song that they love. But there's probably no better man placed to deal with that pressure, because it's going to be a cauldron for him just as much for the players. Yeah,
finally on that, just to mention the atmosphere, Birch, like, if I'm going off what the atmosphere was like on full time on last Saturday night after Ireland beat Scotland, if Ireland do actually go and win this thing at the weekend, I don't know what's going to happen to the Stade de France.
It's going to go crazy. I think, look, the atmosphere in the Scotland game was great, but effectively the game was over at half time, and people were more interested in singing and see what was coming on the DJ list. But this game will go down to the last minute, like South Africa. And then people will just be trying to get tickets for Friday week if we manage to get through. So it's been look at the amount of Irish fans. James, you said New Zealand has been good for New Zealand rugby and the profile of rugby in New Zealand because there's that sense of jeopardy and doubt. Well, the confidence levels here and the momentum it's starting to build, and you're getting people who've never been to the Viva because it's so hard to get tickets, joining this this movement of and hope. It's been incredible for rugby in Ireland, I think, in terms of eyes on the game that normally wouldn't watch it.
Nice way to wrap it up. Quick fire prediction time. We obviously didn't mention the other quarterfinals, but I'm going to get one word answers on all of them now. First of all, Wales against Argentina, Saturday afternoon, 4:00 kickoff. Birch, first up.
I think Argentina have one game in them, and I think it could be this week. So Argentina.
James?
Yeah, Argentina. Just based on Carreras' performance and Hocabares last week, they seem to get their mojo back.
I'm going to skip over the big one until the very end. Sunday, then, the other quarterfinal, England against Fiji in Marseille. Birch?
England. I think Fiji will be better than they have been against Georgia and Portugal, but England will kick them to death.
James?
I'll go Fiji.
Good stuff. France, South Africa, then, Sunday night at Stade de France. James, you can lead us off on this one.
Yeah, South Africa. I think, if you looked at the squads and your guys' team, that's probably where everyone's looking in terms of favourites for this tournament. And I don't know, they just don't care about anyone else but themselves, and I do love that about them.
Birch?
Yeah, South Africa. I think I left that Ireland game, Ireland-South Africa, which we obviously won, but I actually left it having more respect for South Africa and more fear. I think knockout rugby will absolutely suit them. The defence, kicking game, power, and I think they'll do a number on France.
Right. Finally, the big one, Saturday night, Ireland, New Zealand. Birch, take us away. Who's going through to the semi-final to take on Argentina?
Ireland 26, France. Ireland 26, the All Blacks 24.
James?
23-18, All Blacks.
All right. Predictable enough stuff. Fellas, it's been great. Just a reminder to everyone as well, Ireland, New Zealand live on RTÉ Radio 1 on Saturday night, 8 o'clock kickoff Irish time. And you can also watch on RT2 and RT Player England against Fiji on Sunday and France against South Africa. That's a double header live from 3:30 p.m. Fellas, this has been great. Birch, thanks as always on a Thursday. And James, if New Zealand win at the weekend, who knows? We might be phoning you up and getting you back on again over the next couple of weeks to look ahead to a semi-final or final. But it's been brilliant having you on. And we will be back on the RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast early next week, hopefully recapping a famous World Cup quarterfinal win for Ireland. We'll speak to you all then.
The RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast, sponsored by Bank of Ireland.